All right, welcome everyone. Thank you guys all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Steph Schmidt. I'm the manager here. We're so thrilled to have Alexandria Marzano-Lesnevich with us tonight. She's the author of the fantastic new book, The Fact of a Body, A Murder and a Memoir. The Fact of the Body is one of my favorite books of 2017. It's so powerful, it's so brilliantly plotted, and it's gorgeously written. It's also one of the bravest stories I've ever read. I really like what Garth Greenwell said about it. The fact of a body is a remarkable act of witness, an anatomy of silence and the violence it abets, a book of both public and private accountings. Rejecting the false comfort of certainty, it confronts the inadequacy of all our tools for fathoming not just unforgivable crimes, but the baffling human grace that can forgive them. This is a profound and riveting book. Alexandria is a 2014 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow. She's received a Rona Jaffe Award and has twice been a fellow at both McDowell and Yaddo. She received her JD from Harvard, her MFA at Emerson, and her BA from Columbia. She now lives in Boston, where she teaches at Grub Street and in the Graduate Public Policy program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. We're also pleased to have a friend of the bookstore and writer Tim Horvath with us tonight, facilitating the conversation. Tim is the author of a collection of short fiction called Understories, which America's librarian Nancy Pearl calls my favorite collection of short stories in recent memory. Tim teaches creative writing in the BFA and low residency MFA programs at the New Hampshire Institute of Art and is currently writing a novel. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
We're going to start with a reading from Alexandria, then go into the conversation. So please join me in welcoming Alexandria Marzano-Lesnevich to Water Street Bookstore.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you to Water Street Bookstore for having me. Thank you to Steph for that lovely introduction. It's nice to meet people you've only exchanged notes with on Twitter. So it's lovely. And thank you to Tim for doing this conversation with me. I think I'll save talking about the book until we're actually in conversation and just start by reading a brief segment from it. But because of the nature of the material I work with, I just need to begin by saying that this work is not authorized or approved by the person criminally charged or his attorneys, and the views expressed by me do not reflect the views or positions of anyone other than me. My description of any legal proceedings, including my description of the positions of the parties and the circumstances and events of the crimes charged, are drawn solely from the court record, other publicly available information, and my own research. And I'll just add after I say that, it may not surprise you, therefore, that this is nonfiction. Chapter 1, Louisiana, 1992. The boy wears sweatpants the color of a Louisiana lake. Later, the police report will note them as blue, though in every description his mother gives thereafter, she will always insist on calling them aqua or teal. On his feet are the muddy hiking boots every boy wears in this part of the state, perfect for playing in the woods. In one small fist, he grips a BB gun half as tall as he is. The BB gun is the Daisy brand. With a long brown plastic barrel, the boy keeps it shiny as if it were real metal. The only child of a single mother, Jeremy Guillory is used to moving often, sleeping in bedrooms that aren't his. His mother's friends all rent houses along the same dead-end street the landlord calls Watson Road whenever he wants to charge higher rent, though it doesn't really have a name, and even the town police department need directions to find it. Settlers from Iowa named the town after their home state, but, wanting a fresh start, pronounced the name Iowa, even as they kept the spelling. The town has always been a place people come for fresh starts, always been a place they can't quite leave the past behind. There, the boy and his mother stay with whoever can pay the electricity bill one month, whoever can keep the gas on the next. Wherever the boy lands, he takes his BB gun with him. It is his most prized possession. Now it is the first week in February. The leaves are green and lush on the trees, but the temperature dips at night. Lorelei, Jeremy's mother, isn't working. She rented a home just for the two of them, their first, but the electricity's been turned off. Her brother Richard lives in a sprawling house up on the hill, but she's not staying with Richard. Instead, Lorelai and Jeremy are staying with Lorelai's friend Melissa, Melissa's boyfriend Michael, and their baby. The baby is 2 years old, old enough that he wants to play with the boy and screams when he doesn't get his way. Today the baby is wailing. Jeremy, 6 years old, just off the yellow school bus home from kindergarten, eats his after-school snack in a hurry, dreaming of getting away from the noise, dreaming of the fun to be had out in the woods. At the end of the road, there is a weathered white house, and behind it, a thatch of woods. The woods are the dense, deciduous, swampy kind, the kind in which rotting leaves mingle with the earth and the ground gives soft way beneath the boy's feet. Though the thatch is very small, with only a single ravine like a scar in the earth, a single place to play war or dream of hiding away forever, these woods are Jeremy's favorite place to play. He asks his mother for the BB gun. She takes it down from the shelf that keeps it safe from the baby, and she hands it to him. Jeremy runs out the door. 2 children near his age, a boy named Joey and a girl named June, live in the White House by the woods, and though Jeremy likes exploring on his own, it's more fun when Joey can join him. He goes to their door and he knocks. A man answers. The man wears thick glasses. He has a small head and large jug ears. At 26 and only 140 pounds, Ricky Joseph Langley is slight for a grown man, but still much bigger than the boy. He too grew up in this town. Now he rents a home from Joey and June's parents, whom he met when he started working with their mother, Pearl, at the fuel stop out on the highway. He's supposed to pay Pearl $50 a week. He's never been able to afford it. He makes up the money in babysitting. Just a few days ago, he looked after Joey and Jeremy. He brought them soap while they were in the bath. Is Joey here? Jeremy asks. No, Ricky says. They went fishing. It's true. Joey's father and the boy packed up poles just 20 minutes ago and drove out toward the lake. They'll be gone all afternoon. They'll be back soon, Ricky says. You can come in and wait, if you like. Jeremy plays at this house every week. He knows Ricky. Yet he pauses. Why don't you come in? Ricky says again. He opens the door wider and turns away. Jeremy walks over the threshold, carefully props his BB gun against a wall near the entryway, and climbs the stairs to Joey's bedroom. He sits down cross-legged on the floor and begins to play. Ricky climbs the stairs after him. He wants only to watch Jeremy play. Later he will say this, later he will swear to it. But the watching changes something in him, and from then on it is as if he's in a dream. He walks up behind Jeremy and hooks his forearm around the child's neck, lifting him into the air. Jeremy kicks so hard his boots fall off. Ricky squeezes. Jeremy stops breathing. Maybe now Ricky touches him. Maybe now he can admit to himself what he's wanted since seeing Jeremy in the bath. Maybe he doesn't. In all that will come from this moment, the 3 different trials and the 3 different videotaped confessions and the DNA testing and the serology reports and the bodily fluid reports and the psychiatric testimony and all the sworn truths, no one but Ricky will ever know for certain. Ricky picks up Jeremy, cradling the boy as if he were simply asleep, and carries him into his own bedroom. He lays him out on the mattress. He covers Jeremy. No, this is a body now. He covers the body in a blue blanket printed with the cartoon face of Dick Tracy, detective. Then he sits at the edge of the bed and he pets the blonde hair. There's a knock on the door downstairs. He goes to answer it. In the entryway stands a young woman. Her hair is a shade of brown that is often a childhood blonde. Have you seen my son? When Lorelai asks this, she is 3 months pregnant. Who's your son? He asks. Jeremy, she answers, and Ricky realizes he already knew. No, he says. I haven't seen him. She sighs. Well, maybe he's gone to my brother's. Maybe, Ricky agrees. So why don't you come on in? You could use our phone. You could call your brother. Thank you. Lorelei steps inside. To her right, propped up against the wall, is a Daisy brand BB gun. Its long brown barrel shiny and smooth. But she steps to the left. She does not see the gun. He offers her the phone and she dials, looking for her son.
The book began life. I learned about this case when I was in my second year of law, right after my first year of law school at Harvard. I had taken a job in Louisiana helping to defend men accused of murder who faced the death penalty. I'm the daughter of 2 lawyers. I literally grew up talking about the Constitution over the dinner table. I have wanted to fight the death penalty since I was a kid. This was what I planned to do with my life, fight against the death penalty. And what happened was that the very first confession tape I was shown when I got out there was that of Ricky Joseph Langley. And I listened to him describe killing Jeremy Guillory, but I also listened to him describe the pleasure he took in molesting children. He was a convicted pedophile. And though I was there to start the work that I wanted to spend my life doing, in that moment watching the tape, I wasn't 25 years old anymore. In that moment watching the tape, I was a child again, and time kind of collapsed, and I was feeling my grandfather's hands on me, because I had grown up being molested. And in that moment, I wanted Ricky Langley to die. And yet, that same day, I learned that Lorelei Guillory, the mother, the woman you just met, at the trial, she pleaded for Ricky Langley's life. She testified for him. She tried to keep him alive. So there was this conflict immediately for me that was just like, how is it that she could do this and I couldn't? And also this question of, is who we are determined by what we believe, or is who we are determined by our past? And I kind of never stopped thinking about this case. And so it was the details that you just heard that would come back to me, the BB gun and the blue Dick Tracy blanket. Just for years, those would come back to me unbidden. And yet, even as I recalled those, when I tried to remember the name of the man who had killed Jeremy Guillory, I couldn't remember it. And in those years, which was years, I could literally pick up, and did many times, pick up a microfiche printout or pick out, a newspaper article about this case. And I would put it down. As soon as I put it down, the name was gone. Couldn't remember his name. So obviously, I'm going somewhere with this discussion. This was weird, right? That's weird. You agree that's weird. And there's only one other such moment in my life, which was a moment that pertains to my grandfather. A moment where everything is crystal clear and I remember it all, and then there's this pinprick. So I got the file. That's what made me get the file. It was not because I thought I was going to write about it. Ricky Langley was tried 3 times over 20 years. The first time he was sentenced to death in only 3 hours. It's really fast. The second time, 10 years later, he was given a life sentence. And I became curious how. And that was the trial at which Lorelei Guillory had given her testimony. And of course, I thought that it was because of what Lorelei had testified, that she had testified. That wasn't, I don't think, what it actually turned out to be. But so I got the records, the 8,000 pages from that second trial, originally just thinking that I would read it and it would stop haunting me. I would know all the facts and it would leave me alone. Obviously, that didn't happen. So to your question, what did happen, one of the things that happened when I had these records was this really complicated thing where this man who had been just in my mind, just so evil, just pure evil, so much so that I couldn't even remember his name, so much so that he wasn't a name to me, he wasn't a person to me. I was reading these records of when he was a teenager and trying to get help and trying to turn himself in. And I was reading him sort of try again and again, and that was the worst, honestly. That was the worst, because that made him start to seem like a person to me. And that was the feeling I wanted to capture, because in this book, it feels really important to me to capture the terrible truth that kind of everybody's a person, right? The terrible, beautiful truth. But then also not lose sight of what he did, to sort of allow that to be both.
Well, and you call it that complicated middle ground, which is sort of, the law doesn't have room for that, can't make room for that complicated middle ground where we're people are human. Everyone is human. Everyone has reasons for what they did, or what they've done. And I feel like you complicate each of these characters, or you find what's complicated in them by sort of pursuing these side roads and backstories and sort of, refusing to. You start out with this the story that's told in law school, which I think is really sort of provides a sort of a framework for the book itself in a way, where this incident happens. I'm sure you can tell it better than I can, but this incident happens where basically there's an explosion at a train station, and a scale falls possibly on this woman. It's never established definitely. You talk about where does the story start? How do we decide where the story starts? And how does that apply to sort of your own pursuit of this story?
So first of all, I'll just say, at times I'm still really shocked that they let me get away with starting a book with a 1930s law case that has, technically speaking, absolutely nothing to do with this murder. At one point in writing the book, I started to realize that it really was all about how you tell a story and how you make a story of the past. And if that was the case, then I was going to have to think about this case, Palsgraf versus Long Island Railroad, that every law student knows because it's how you teach about cause. And Palsgraf is known for this idea of proximate cause that determines cause in torts law. And that really comes down to how do you tell the story? Which of the possible causes do you privilege in telling the story? And I think it's really interesting that we don't have a concept of proximate cause in criminal law, meaning that in torts law, we care immensely about what's the cause. And in criminal law, we actually really don't. Like there's no equivalent concept. We just don't care what caused a criminal to do this. And yet I think our understanding of cause, or at least the story we tell ourselves about cause, has a lot to do with what we think about a person and what they did. Whether we find empathy for them, whether we don't, how much, what we think about it. And so I wanted to kind of highlight that. The book is structured in 3 parts, and it braids Ricky Langley and my stories. It's really funny to me now that I've been talking to people about this book pretty much every day to realize that I'm referring to people in this book by their first names, and it's just because I've been living with them in my head for so long. So with Ricky Langley, the book braids his story and to some extent Lorelei Guillory's story, and to a little bit of an extent Jeremy Guillory's, but one thing I wanted to highlight in this book was how little of the victims are in criminal records. They're just not there. So there's this braid that starts with the murder that you just read, and there's a prologue before that, the murder that you just heard, rather. And Ricky Langley's thread, and his thread, the first part of this book, begins with the murder and follows 3 days after until when they find the boy's body. So that's one way to tell the story of this murder, is to focus on the murder and follow through until they find the boy's body. In my family, the thread starts when I'm a child and comes through to when the abuse becomes sort of public, sexual abuse in my family becomes sort of publicly known within the family at least. But then the second part of the book backtracks, and mine continues chronologically because the reader's got to follow something, and also because it made sense for various story reasons. But in his thread, it goes back in time to before Ricky was conceived. Because I think that's another way to tell the story. If you want to understand this murder, okay, let me tell you about before he was even born, what happened in his family, and what was happening when he was a child, and what was happening when he was a young man, and how he got here. And it's not to excuse it, it's just a different question of how do we tell this story? So just one more thing?
Yeah, please.
The third part of the book then is like a present day me, like trying to put it together. You come with me back to Iowa and try to piece together the pieces. I didn't even realize until I was writing the third part of the book that I had just structured the book like a trial. That in the first way, the way you tell the story is you focus on the crime, and that's the prosecution. Mm-hmm. And in the second way, the way you tell the story is you say, no, wait, it's more complicated than that, and that's the defense. So
yeah,
the idea of storytelling became...
So this was an accidental form that sort of came to you, or you became aware that you were doing this only once it sort of fell into place, or maybe you have that instinctively in you, maybe having studied the law?
It might be that, but I think it also just has to do with naturally how you would tell a story.
Right.
How would you tell a story if you were going to try to get at the complexity of it?
Right.
And yeah, I think if I had from the start decided that I was going to structure this book like a trial, it would have seemed hideously gimmicky to me, and I never would have done it. But because it emerged organically, it felt okay.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about structure, I want to talk about sort of the way in which your story and the story of the murder are interwoven, because I think it's unique as far as I know. You know, it's sort of, you know, part of it is memoir, part of it is true crime, and the way you've paced them, I think, is somewhat remarkable. I mean, it starts out, my experience is that I would start reading one story and I would almost like forget about the other one until it would cut away, and then I would get, you know, sort of the seesaw would tilt and I would be back in the other story and I would forget about the other, you know. And this happened, you know, I kind of went back and forth a few times, and then the stories start to braid together or bleed together in ways that are rather remarkable. And there's one page where I marked, it's sort of, I think, chapter 10, where chapter 9 becomes chapter 10, and sort of, you know, his story and your story are on opposing pages right there. The teenage years are, you know, sort of there on opposing pages. And then within the chapters, they start to sort of braid together, or, you know, the braids become more intricate, more complex. And so how did you figure out the pacing of this book and the interweaving of it?
So once I realized that I wasn't going to write strictly memoir or strictly journalism, because I tried both of those renditions of this story and it kind of collapsed because it wasn't capturing the things I wanted to get at. It became apparent to me that I was going to have a storyteller, like a really active storyteller that you're introduced to in the prologue, which I didn't read. He says, like, basically, I'm reading these files and I can see the people in them as clearly as I can see people in my own life, or these memories feel real to me, these ideas, these stories feel real to me. And so I wanted to have this sort of liberty to kind of move around in time and also bring the scenes to life in a way that I was imagining them, but also being careful to note. I mean, there are 12 pages of source notes in the back. Everything in this book happened. And that was because I wanted to get at this idea of looking at the case and seeing my own life in it. Because when I had gotten the files, what I had realized, the thing that shocked me, the thing that led me to write this book, was realizing that even though I thought I shouldn't see my own life in it, that I should be able to see it just for itself, actually everybody else who encountered the case saw it through the lens of their own past. So the jury foreman saw it through the lens of his past, the lead defense attorney saw it through the lens of his past, the judge, defense past. And that collision started to seem important. Like, the jury foreman told me that when he saw Ricky, he saw his brother, you know? And so I wanted to get at that layering.
Yeah.
So I realized that both that there would have to be a braid, but then the braids would have to start to break down. And so there started to be moments like with Bessie's house dress. I think that's one of the biggest moments in this book. You watch Ricky go visit his parents in the trailer where they live, and I described Bessie's house dress, the house dress his mother's wearing. And then the very next chapter, what I ended up doing was just being very straightforward with the reader, saying at the start of the chapter, look, that house dress isn't in any file or record. The house dress you just read, the house dress you just saw in the scene, the color of that house dress is not in any record or file, it's my grandmother's dress. And here's what's happening, I'm seeing her, but I'm seeing my grandmother, because these women are so linked. So once I realized that I was going to start bleeding it in that way, it just became a question of where and how much could I get away with, right? Like, how much could I blur things and not lose forward momentum? So then I did the probably very impractical and inefficient thing of I wrote a couple of 100-page condensed versions of the book. So I had all this material and I was trying to figure out what went in and what didn't, and where would I move back and forth in time and where would it bleed. And the only way to do that was to sort of, I thought about it like watching a movie on flash forward. So I was trying to figure out where I would slow down and we would have a scene, where I would speed up and things like that. So a lot of the pacing, a lot of things like that got figured out in those little forms,
Wow.
even though they didn't end up actually being a blueprint for the book. I ended up having to throw them away. This book took me a long time to write. I ended up having to throw them away and retell it, but I think that taught me a lot about the material.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard about that exact process. I love the idea of sort of multiple versions in order to figure out pacing. I mean, and so much of what you're describing in terms of sort of imagining the dress on Bessie seems to be linked to a larger issue in the book, or maybe even beyond the book, which is the issue of empathizing with people and empathizing with your characters. And it feels like so much of what this book is about is sort of how we empathize, you know, with people who are, you know, sort of criminals, you know, people who are defined as being, you know, sort of outsiders in society, but even with people who were in your sphere of your family, you know, even people whose greatest crime maybe was falling silent or turning away and sort of ignoring what was in front of them. And I'm wondering about, does the empathy come in the act of writing these characters? Is it a struggle toward sort of figuring out, okay, so here's this person, right? Here's what they did. Here are their mannerisms and habits. If I get close enough to those, if I capture those well enough, then I can sort of tap into them and understand them? Or is it something else?
That's a good question. So with Ricky Langley, it started because of the files. Once I had these, I have his handwriting when he was a teenager, you know, him filling out forms and stuff. It became impossible to ignore the fact that he had once tried, or what I think is the fact that he had once tried. And then I think, without ever forgetting what he did, because I think it's this horrible back and forth almost, where I can sort of empathize with him, but then where the book's title comes in, there's still the fact of the body, there's still the fact of Jeremy's body, there's still the fact of what he did to people. Back and forth and back and forth. And I think once I was doing that back and forth with Ricky Langley, and then realized I was going to write about this, and then started to write other people, it immediately became apparent, well, you know, the decisions my parents made around the abuse are really hard for me as a person. But as someone who's going to put together this book, I can't possibly empathize with Ricky Langley, a murderer, pedophile, and not think about who my parents were as young people, and why they made the choices they did, and what they were grappling with, and things like that. So in a weird way, Langley became the root into my own family, into forcing myself to think about those things. And I think we have a different relationship as writers. I mean, my background in writing began with fiction. Okay. And so I think you have a different relationship to a character than you do to a person in real life. And in a character, you're kind of hovering over them. You can see them in 3 dimensions, and you have to see their motivations, and you have to have empathy for them. Which is, I don't know, maybe other people live their lives that way all the time, but I don't. I don't see my parents that way all the time. I sometimes just am very emotional responsive. But then I would like go away to an arts colony or go to a McDowell or something, and I would be hanging out with the younger imagined versions of my, imagined because I didn't know them when they were, you know, I wasn't conscious of anything. Right. I would be hanging out with them in that way, and I would have to kind of try to imagine, like, what were they struggling with? What was going on? What were their hopes? What were their dreams and desires for their own lives, and why did they make those choices? Right. So it really came through in, I think, the many hours, what it came from, I think, was the many hours of just hanging out with the younger them in my head, which was really weird because I would start to like really miss them and have this whole other relationship with them that was like a complement to the relationship I have with them in real life, but was separate because they, you know, weren't actually part of that relationship. Yeah. It was weird.
Can I read a couple of quotes about these characters, your words, just because they're so great, and I feel like I just want to share them with people. So this is you on your father. He loves the yard almost as much as he loves the house, and since we moved here, he's started wearing Wrangler jeans that flare out at the bottoms and boots, and a wide-brimmed suede cowboy hat that shields him from the sun as he cuts neat roads in the grass. A New Jersey cowboy, at least for now. All my childhood, he'll reinvent himself, wriggling out of a new identity every few years. the opera years, the plaid golf years, the years when Cole Porter's voice swings through the house and a white dinner jacket appears. I mean, just the way you have sort of circumscribed him and captured him. It's not exactly a snapshot because it's moving. It's in motion over time. It's a time lapse, but you've just captured him so well there. And then your mom, the born and bred New Yorker from Astoria, Queens, who didn't consent to drive until she was 38 and will never lose the stiffness in her hold on the wheel, her hands locked into the 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions as she was taught. I mean, I think one of the things that is hard to convey without actually just, urging people to read the book, the precision of detail, the exactitude of detail. Your brother with it, he hangs up posters on his wall, and he just puts poster on top of posters, and so at a certain point, the room actually will seem smaller, a couple of inches trimmed off on each side by the weight of all the posters. These brilliant details where, fiction or nonfiction, these characters spring to life very vividly. And I'm wondering, did you find it more challenging to write about those close to you versus speculating? There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of imagining yourself into situations where you weren't there. And yet writing them as if you were, or as if you were them, with little clues that you weren't.
First of all, thank you. So, with the characters in Ricky Langley's life, the records gave me such incredible access into that imagining. So anything any of the characters says in the book, any line of dialogue, like I have reference to somewhere in the records. Anything that I have them imagining, I have some reference to things that they were thinking. So they began to take shape for me, but at the same time, even as they were taking shape for me, once I started to look at the way I was imagining them, I could see the traces of where like the signature for my own life was, like that dress, or just how really my understanding of Alcide, like when he built the house that the family then lived in, is totally informed by watching my father do yard work and things like that. So once I started to watch that happen with the characters from Ricky Langley's life, I think it changed the way I saw the ones in my own again. And it made me, I would find these details in the files that I would seize upon and would be like, oh, that's such an amazing detail. To me, a character springs forward from it, or a person rather springs forward from it. And then I would go looking for those details in my own life. So basically, like, I wrote a lot, cut a lot, wrote a lot, cut a lot, wrote a lot, cut a lot. And it was strange when I started to realize that the white dinner jacket, or the Cole Porter years, or my brother's movie posters, like details that are just details of my family, that just define my family members for me, were going to end up in the book.
Yeah,
it's strange.
And they start to resonate, with other details, as you braid these stories together.
And some of them I was shockingly late to realize the resonance. I would be sort of writing blindly into this, like thinking about a moment in my own life, and sort of thinking about Ricky's, but like Ricky Langley's would be over there, I'd be writing in my own life. And I'd suddenly realized that there was a profound resonance. The corollary between Oscar and the missing child in my family, Ricky Langley had this brother who was killed in a terrible accident before he was born. And in my own family, there was a missing sister. Now it seems incredibly obvious that that parallel was part of why I was drawn to this, and the question of how the hold the past has over a family, and what silence does, and what are the secrets that we don't talk about, and things like that. But at the time, I was just like, oh, well, I'm writing about Oscar from the records. I don't know why I'm so drawn to this. And it would hit me with a thunderbolt. Oh, gee, I think I know why I'm so drawn to this. Yeah. So a lot of it was kind of going towards the subconscious.
Wow. I'd like to open it up to, I have other questions, but sort of open it up to a wider discussion. I'm sure that, I'm guessing.
How long did it take you to write this book?
So, depending on how you think about it, either 7 years or 10 years. 10 years was the idea. and I got the record. I got the first set of records, 10 years, and then spent 3 years avoiding reading them, just because I was afraid of what I was going to find and what it was going to do to me. And then so it was after I sort of got to reading them in 2010, it was 7 years. A weird quirk of the book is that 7 years, but then half of it was written in the last, half of the actual text was written in the last year before turning it in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because I wrote and threw it away and wrote and threw it away in 2003, so 3 years in, I threw away everything but 25 pages. I just kept doing that.
Wow. And so when you think about those pages that got thrown away, like what is their status in your mind? I mean, were they necessary to get to this? Or are there pages that you had difficulty parting with? What is their sort of status for you?
I'm weirdly okay with parting with things, possibly to an overextent.
Okay.
But no, for me they were. It took me a while to understand that what I was going to do was something as weird as having half the book be research, half the book be memoir, and have the sort of, I think, audacity to sort of have them bleed together in this way and say, this is nonfiction, but I'm imagining all these moments and whatnot. It took a lot of reading pages that were flat. Mm. So the very first version of the book I did was much more memoir-y. And I wasn't aware of that. I kind of gave it to somebody and was like, what do you see? And they described what they saw back to me. They're like, oh, it's an activist memoir and whatnot. And I'm like, but what about Lorelei Hillary? You haven't mentioned Lorelei. And the person literally said, wait, who? And I was like, oh.
But that's the reader you want, actually. Someone who's going to be that.
No, it was wonderful. I mean, it literally was the reaction that set me on the course of this book.
Wow.
Because what I realized was that I was haunted, and the hauntedness wasn't coming through. Right. I could talk about the hauntedness all I want. That wasn't going to do anything. I had to sort of induce the hauntedness in the reader.
Oh, yeah.
And so that meant doing all this. So it just took a lot of writing and throwing away.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, someone else.
Okay, then you're next.
You said there were 3 trials. What happened at the 3rd trial?
So the third trial was really interesting. The 2nd trial resulted in a life sentence, which, from an outside perspective, you have in Louisiana a guy who's confessed to killing a little boy, and who's a convicted, pedophile. That the victim was under 12 is an automatic enhancer for the death penalty in Louisiana, so the death penalty is automatically on the table. You would almost think that a life sentence would sort of, you don't want to call it a win for the defense, but you would almost think that that would be enough to leave it alone. And so for years I thought that surely it was the prosecution who had pushed for the 3rd trial. And that's not so at all. It was the defense. And why has to do with the fundamental sort of project of the book, and this question of how we see our lives through the lives of others and how we make stories out of the past. And I will say the actual legal mechanism for getting a 3rd trial shocked the heck out of me. And was something that when I first encountered it in the files, I was sitting in a coffee shop in New Orleans reading these records, and I actually got up, put the files down at the table, left all my stuff, walked out into the middle of the street, vibrating with the weirdness and intensity of what I had just found. And there was nobody who I could grab and say, oh my God, can you believe? I was just sort of vibrating with it. And it had to be with the judge. Yeah, I ended up just getting a mug that says creative nonfiction, because you can't make this stuff up.
Another amazing character.
So I'm sort of answering this obliquely to not give it away, but suffice it to say, in the 3rd trial, he was again sentenced to life, and he is serving a life sentence now.
It's sort of an inside baseball question, but when you sold the book, was it in the format structure it is now, or did your editor sort of help you form it that way? Or did you sell it as a memoir and a true crime kind of mix, which is really unusual?
I sold it as a mix. So I had tried to write a traditional proposal for this book, and it just like collapsed it, because I think it's a book that works off of the imagistic layering, and if you're not persuaded that the images in my life and the images in Langley's life are sort of piling up into a correspondence in the reader's mind, it's not going to be persuasive. It just came out flat. And so eventually I decided that a traditional proposal wasn't the way to go. So we sold it on, I wrote the first 100 pages, pretty much exactly dead on as they are now. And then I really love condensed versions. A condensed 93-page retelling of the rest of the book. The only thing is I didn't have, like a lot of the records I still didn't have. So, and the third part of the book was, I was just kind of going all over the place. I mean, because I wanted to put it all together and show the reader how it was all connected. And so it was me doing this, this, and this. And so the way in which my fabulous editor did end up helping to shape the third part of it was something he said on the phone when we were talking before he actually bought it. We were talking, and I knew I wanted to work with him. I knew we were gonna, there were other people interested, but I knew I wanted to work with him. And he was like, "Can I just point your attention to this paragraph in the third part of the proposal? You see that in this one paragraph, you are in like 4 different families and 5 different time periods. Maybe the reader might have trouble following this. So what I need you to do is I need you to figure out what the reader is going to follow in the third, even as you go like this and point and connect all this thing." And then so on the phone, like making it up in that moment because I wanted to work with him, I was like, well, why don't I structure it on a 2015 research trip back to Iowa, Louisiana? And that's what I ended up doing. So it's a composite trip because I actually took many, many trips, but it's there's a through line there. So the rest of it's me sort of reaching around, but there's at least a through line.
And was that easy to do, to sort of make a composite out of those many trips back, or was that challenging?
It was easy because file rooms are file rooms are file rooms are file
Okay.
rooms, and how many scenes in a file room do you need? No, so what was weird, I sort of had trouble with the idea at first because, you know, me driving to the high school where they were, or me driving to the mental health center, or me going to the, like, I had trouble imagining how dramatic that would be. But once I was writing it, it actually made sense. Or I think it made sense.
Mm-hmm. That would be great.
What I feel so strongly when I'm there is, and I was actually there not long ago, like 2 months ago. What I feel so strongly when I'm there is knowing these stories that like the buildings hold and the land holds, and how vivid they are in my mind. To be there is actually quite strange because of course it's just a town, like daily life is going on all around you, but then also you sort of feel what's in the records, and I wanted to capture that.
Well, that atmosphere too brings so much, I think, to the work itself, and also the things that you can't find, where you look for things that are missing or mysterious. So I think sort of working from those different places, you know, sort of going back and forth between different places, adds to that sense of a braided narrative. So I wanted to pick up on something you said. You said that you started writing fiction. I didn't know that. And I want to ask you about sort of your relationship, or the relationship for you between fiction and nonfiction, because for me, I've tried writing nonfiction and it just doesn't work. And I can take the exact same material, and for me it's sort of, you know, just having that little bit of leeway to deviate from fact, or to, you know, to combine and to you know, to do whatever fiction writers do with material that doesn't work in nonfiction is necessary. And I'm wondering, do you find that you're able to go back and forth? Are you bilingual in terms of genre?
I have to go back and forth.
You do?
I can't stand not going back and forth.
Wow.
And I think it's because if something really sticks with me in a nonfiction sense, it's going to be troubling my subconscious in a way that I can't work out entirely in nonfiction. So let me take an example. Ricky Langley in this book, it was really hard in the files to escape the idea that to a certain extent he was trapped by who he was. He was sort of trapped by the immovable fact of who he was. And there were these moments that were really troubling when he knows who he is. He's been molesting children, he says, since he was 9 or 10. He was molesting children younger than him. And since shortly thereafter, he's, depending on, as with everything in this book, depending on how you interpret the evidence, he either has been trying to kill himself since then, or has not been seriously been trying to kill himself, but rather has been making cries for help in some way or cries for attention. So in moments he knows who he is and he wants to stop, and he tries different things to stop, some quite terrible. One of the ways in which he has told the story of the murder many, many, many ways. He started confessing as soon as he led them to the body and destroying his body. He's told it many different ways. One of the ways in which he tells it was that he murdered Jeremy in an effort not to molest him. It's really hard to read. And so that idea of of the stories we tell, I'm sorry, that fact just blew the question right out of my head. That fact still kills me. What?
About fiction and nonfiction?
Fiction and fiction, okay. So this question of who he was and how aware he was of who he is something I really struggle with. And in many moments he is aware of who he is. And then there are these moments where he says things that just, are, for lack of a better word, just so incredibly disturbing and creepy and seem to slide out of awareness. I'm thinking of this very strange seminar that the defense team had him give for law enforcement officials, in which he was to explain the mind of a pedophile. As you can imagine, giving a pedophile the floor to explain that, it was a really peculiar, that's not even a strong enough word, choice on the part of the team, and I think there are reasons behind it that relate to the subject matter, the driving force of this book. But he said a lot of things that really complicated my sense of him as somebody who understood who he was or understood the harm he was doing. So he was constantly sliding back and forth. But it really got me to thinking, well, what's it like when somebody isn't sliding back and forth? What's it like when somebody knows who they are but is trapped by the fact of who they are? And that was something I couldn't explore in nonfiction entirely, because that's not who I have. That's not what the records are. That's not the truth here. And so that meant that I had to write fiction.
Wow.
So I just think it gives rise to different questions.
Yeah. So I guess that leads into the natural question of what you're working on, or what you're going to be doing next. I mean, this is you've got a big tour that you're in the midst of right now. But have you thought about that? Is that something that you're
only multiple times a day is terror.
Okay.
No, I mean to not have a project is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
No, so I've been working on. I actually have deadlines for this. I have been spending a lot of time in Cambodia, and I think a lot. So in law, when I went to law school, I really thought that law was like this truth-finding mechanism. That we had a trial and it was a competition between two things, then we figure out the truth. We figure out the facts of what happened, and it's whatever. It's impossible to hold on to that belief during law school. And so you really end up thinking about, and as I did a lot with this sort of case, thinking about the way that the law more functions as a truth-making mechanism. It makes a story, and we call that story truth. And we hope it has a relationship to the truth, but as with this, there are 3 trials, there was still a ton of stuff that was never figured out, stuff that I think was really important to how we understand it. So I think it's a sort of a story-producing mechanism, and I thought a lot about this book as trying to peel back the covering over that story and tell a story partially about how it was constructed, tell a story about how we make stories. So then I started to spend time in Cambodia, and I was thinking, wait, so if a main way that we make a story about what happened in our society here is in the legal system, and we make it in the educational system through curricula, and we make it through the media, you have those 3 main ways, and in Cambodia you have a society in which those 3 main ways were in operation and then were destroyed very, very quickly and still haven't really recovered. And so the question for me became well, how does that story get made? So I've been doing a lot of interviews at the International Criminal Tribunal there, talking to people about the trial, because the trial that's ongoing it has a lot of resonance for the West, I think, but has differing levels of resonance there, and certainly isn't regarded as a production of a story. So I actually have a deadline now for a piece about sort of what is a trial for, like what is that trial for? And then I've also been sitting in on teacher trainings for secondary school teachers in how to teach the genocide. And these kids are 19, 20, and when I started sitting in on these trainings, I very quickly realized that many of them think that the genocide is a rumor.
Oh, wow.
And so the question, like, I think that in the act of trying to make this curricula, what's really happening is like a story is being produced about the past. And so it's, anyway, I'll be back there in February. I don't know what I'm doing except writing these shorter articles. And I've been doing some other work on sort of the body, and this is going to sound really gruesome, but cadaver dissection and the body and sort of what the body holds. I'm super interested in fascia. Through a strange stream, I had the opportunity to dissect a cadaver last summer, and we are held together by fascia. We are held together by like little white netting that literally holds us together. It's fascinating to me. So anyway, I don't know what I'm doing with all this, but I'm thinking about it all. I'm writing short pieces and hoping it becomes a longer project.
Okay.
In some capacity.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remind myself how long I was lost in the weeds with this one. I didn't know it would be about be lost in the weeds. Yeah. And then at some point I'm going to write a book about puppies or bunnies or something happening.
They're also held together by fascia.
They're also held together by fascia. It is true.
I'm wondering if there are connections that you can draw with our current political crisis. You know, the word fact is in the title. Facts and bodies are both sort of under fire right now, and there are, you know, this idea of competing stories. Sorry to go from bunnies and puppies to that, to Comey. But right, I mean, I didn't watch that testimony today, but I mean, the idea was that his storytelling ability was going to perhaps make as much impact as, and you know, so we're at a moment right now where you're talking about these Cambodian students who are, you know, for whom the genocide may be a rumor, and we're at a point where there's dispute about the most basic facts about our own, you know, sort of political goings on and what constitutes a fact here.
And I think also, you know, the election was a contest between two stories.
Right.
Looking at the world and telling two different stories about it and fitting things into those stories. What I teach at the Kennedy School is basically an argument for the way narrative underlies policy, which was semi-obscure until November, and then became really urgent. And so for me, yeah, it's very connected. I really think it's important to understand that we're constantly telling ourselves stories, right? Joan Didion, we tell ourselves stories in order to live, but we also tell ourselves stories on a social level, pretty much constantly. And I think we're watching that happen over and over again. So there's a question, I think, of alternative facts and just like outright lies and things that aren't accurate. But then there's also the question of, well, wait, what about the idea that we can look at just a set of facts and we can actually spin totally different stories about it and understand those facts differently based on the different story we have in our head about the world. My students at the Kennedy School are from all over the world, and they all come in thinking, policy, forward, like I will just explain the data and the data will move people, and then they get in the room and they try to move each other, and they all quickly realize that a Nigerian student has a very different idea of what's persuasive and how a story works than an Austrian student, for example. For some reason, that's on my mind because they quite about fight last term.
That sounds like an interesting story in and of itself.
And that question, well, I think this idea of like narratology and our expectations of story are fundamentally related to what we find persuasive, and fundamentally related to how we find meaning. When I teach memoir, one of the things I notice is that if someone's working, and it's easier to see when you're sort of hovering over it as a teacher than when you're in it as a writer. You take the same event in your life, and if you put it in the position of the inciting incident in a narrative, it has a fundamentally different meaning than if you put it in the position of the crisis or the climax in a narrative, which is a totally different meaning. Which is why I put Jeremy Guillory's death up front. I didn't want that to be the crisis or the
It's not a
climax.
whodunit.
Like, it's not a whodunit, and it's also like it would have felt cheap to put that in the climax, which subtly says you were reading this to come to this moment. And so anyway, that's a long rambling thing to just say. I think we're more awareness that we're constantly making stories, and that how we position the narrative determines our interpretation of meaning.
Yeah. And maybe the way in which you're able to find empathy across, sort of with people who are very different from you is also something that is sort of sorely lacking right now in our very fractured, sort of split society. I think, there's something to think about there in terms of how you imaginatively step into these people and sort of explore them and give them their moment.
And yet also, thank you. Also, even as I'm imagining them, I'm like, one of the things that became apparent in this, I'm telling a story about a family that, lacks for the resources that my family. And my interpretations of it are premised on sort of where I came from and who I am. And it was really important to me to highlight the construction of the narrator in this, because I don't think this is the story that they would tell. And I don't think this is the story my parents would tell, to some extent in some ways, but not entirely. My story is sort of incredibly premised on where I'm coming from, and I think being honest and open about that is one way to not counter an ethical bias, but at least acknowledge an ethical bias.
Right. Yeah. Are there any other questions that you have?
I'm just curious, did you ever have any contact with Jeremy Blaney throughout the writing of this, and were you ever tempted to, if not?
I did. The book ends with it, and I don't know how much else to say.
Yeah.
Give it away. Yeah.
There are a lot of twists and turns there. I mean, for a book in which we find out who done it right away, there are lots of other sort of mysteries within mysteries, I would say.
Well, the idea that I may have sort of found a murder-suicide, I'm not sure, but additional murder-suicide
Right.
in the research of
There's
the book.
there's a whole
There's
book
a whole
like
mystery
yeah,
inside it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you guys so
All
much.
right.
This is fantastic.
Thanks.